What's a fact you learned that instantly made you question reality? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. The Romans figured out how to make heated floors. Central heating sounds like a modern invention, but apparently it's been around for 2,000 years. I think a lot of people fall victim to thinking that we collectively are more intelligent than people from thousands of years ago. Modern humans, that's us, came onto the scene like 40,000 years ago, and they are no different from anyone living today. We're just the result of incremental improvements. It's why the internet is hands down the most revolutionary invention in all of history. We don't lose information anymore, it can be shared to billions of people instantly. If every advancement ever made, though, all our time had been recorded in a way that the rest of the world could have access to it, build on it, make it better, we would have been out exploring the universe a long time ago. Now, I'm not saying we aren't really messed up in how many people use this amazing invention, but as a potential tool for us to advance as a species, it's unparalleled. Story 2. You know those fun universe animations that start out with the Earth, or maybe something on Earth, then zooms out bit by bit, comparing us to something larger in the universe? Then it keeps going. You can't see the Earth anymore, but you can focus on the sun. But then the sun is gone. And we're still getting smaller because we haven't gotten to the biggest object yet. Smaller and smaller and smaller. We barely even exist. But I complain about the drive to Dallas. I kinda get that from looking at the Milky Way in the sky. As you look toward the center, it should just be a big bright blob, but it isn't. There are black bits mixed in. Those black areas are stuff between us and those stars. There is so much stuff out there. Story 3. That we had thought before we had language. I've been thinking about this one a lot. I have a daughter who is 7.5 months old. She definitely doesn't understand language yet, but there is still a lot going on in her head. She recognizes things and is clearly capable of manipulating her environment, and I'm constantly wondering what her stream of consciousness is like without thinking in words. But we will never know, because by the time she's old enough to actually articulate her thoughts, it will be too late for her to remember how her consciousness worked before she understood language. Story 4. It is literally impossible to describe in words what quantum superposition is. Everything you've heard about quantum superposition is, at best, sort of right, but also a lot wrong. But we don't have a way to describe it properly, so those half-assed Schrodinger's cat, both and neither at the same time, etc. Explanations just stick around because without understanding the math, you just can't understand quantum superposition properly. Quantum reality is simply that different from macroscopic reality. Our intuition cannot comprehend what is happening. I do not understand quantum superposition, and unless you're a theoretical quantum physicist, neither do you. And some of them don't. But we know it's real, it happens, it affects reality. We cannot convey what is happening with words. That crap with me is so hard. Story 5. I think the best interpretation would be to think of the universe as a giant open-ended and infinite game of 20 questions. In the normal game of questions, the person answering has a particular thing in mind that the guesser is trying to guess. But a different way to play is that the person who answers doesn't actually have a particular thing in mind, and they answer randomly yes or no. As they randomly answer questions, the space of possible things that the thing could be shrinks, and with enough questions, the thing would be resolved into existence. And you don't get 20 questions, you get infinitely many, or at least as many as you can accrue in a lifetime, or in a civilization. Story 6. I read somewhere that we can only see about 0.0035% of the electromagnetic spectrum, meaning we're practically blind to most of what's going on around us. It made me question how much of reality is hidden from us, existing beyond what our senses can perceive. Another one that shook me was learning that trees can communicate with each other through underground fungal networks, sharing nutrients and even warning each other about threats. It completely flipped my understanding of forests. They're not just a collection of individual trees, but more like an interconnected community working together. Reality suddenly seemed a lot more complex. Story 7. Light doesn't experience time. From its departure from a quasar on the far end of the universe to a sensor on a space telescope that was built a decade ago, the journey took almost the entire lifespan of existence. And yet, as far as the photon is concerned, the trip was instantaneous. If that wasn't wild enough, here's the real mindcrap. There's no such thing as a free photon. They only exist as a carrier for energy exchange between electrons. For a photon to exist, it has to have a sender and a recipient. Two electrons separated by the entirety of space and time somehow agreed to exchange a photon. Story 8. Apparently, schizophrenia can hit anyone at any time, and using psychoactive drugs like LSD and magic mushrooms significantly increase the chances of you getting schizophrenia. To keep a long story short, it isn't a stretch to say that most religious and philosophical figures of our past were probably schizophrenic, since many religions and metaphysical questions before science were based on visions, voices, and generic signs of whatever sparked their tirades. Makes me wonder a lot about how reality and unreality are just a matter of perception. This could be framed the other way around as well. Schizophrenia might not be a disease, but the ability of perceiving things that are described as supernatural. I'm not saying I believe this, just sharing as a thought exercise. I know schizophrenia is a screw on a person. Story 9. Human comprehension of reality is so far from accurate it's functionally useless. Every understanding, scientific discovery, whatever we make, is at best just us trying to make things make sense to us. But humans simply don't have the brain power, hardware to come anywhere close to an actual understanding of reality. It's like an ant walking on an iPhone. Its brain can process things like, this surface is smooth, there is no food here, and that's about as complex as it can get. But that's nowhere near the level of complexity of the iPhone itself. We're not really experiencing reality. We're all just navigating an environment through senses we've developed. I've always thought this was cool, scary to think about. Story 10. That UFOs, UAPs, are acknowledged by the US government, and Congress is currently debating legislation about whether or not to declassify information related to them that has been kept hidden by top-secret defense programs since 1947. All of this being spurred by multiple whistleblowers, whose information was recently leaked by the Inspector General's office, making astonishing claims under oath before Congress, such as exotic, not of this earth materials being in the possession of defense contractors, and even more incredibly that non-human biological material has been recovered from crashed UAP. All of it seems unbelievable and very well might be complete nonsense. But the attitude of our elected officials who have been privy to more info than us screams to me that there's more to it all. Story 11. If you had a really long stick that connected to the moon, and you pulled the stick, the other end of the stick wouldn't move instantly. It would take as long as it takes for the speed of sound, traveling through wood, to reach the moon from Earth for the other end, to move as a result of your pulling the stick. I think the thing that gets me about this is I knew everything I needed to know to reach this conclusion on my own, but I'd literally just never thought about this specific hypothetical before. And when you actually write it out like that, it feels so counterintuitive, even though I intellectually understand all the component pieces that make it true. Story 12. The birthday paradox is a fun one. I wouldn't say I questioned reality as I am math nerd, but it's fun to share with people who aren't so inclined. For those unaware, it deals with the probability of two randomly chosen people out of a larger group of people having the same birthday, and that you only need a room of 23 people for that probability to be greater than 50%. 50 people, and it becomes 97%. To explain a little further on why this ends up seeming so surprising, impossible for most people when they first hear this, it's because people often confuse the premise of probability that two randomly chosen people share a birthday with probability that one other randomly chosen person shares my birthday, which is not the same calculation. Story 13. Lemmings have been widely believed to exhibit herd mentality, i.e. following each other off cliffs in mass suicide. This was such a widespread belief that a famous video game during the 90s was based on this concept. However, this is a myth, and the root of the myth is even more horrifying. It stems from a Disney documentary in 1958 called White Wilderness, which, incidentally, won an Oscar, in which a famous scene depicted a large mass of lemmings throwing themselves off a tall cliff to their death. This was later, through another documentary, proven to be a misleading and factually inaccurate scene arranged by the crew. What actually happened? The film crew, desperate for a memorable moment, flew lemmings out to a filming location in Canada and repeatedly threw the lemmings off the cliff to capture the moment. The film insinuates that this was a breed of lemming known for mass migration flinging themselves into the Arctic, when in fact, It was a different breed of captive lemmings being abused by a film crew and thrown into the Bow River in Canada. Story 14. One fact that can instantly make you question reality is that all the atoms that make up our bodies are 99.9999% empty space. This means that what we perceive as solid matter, our bodies, objects around us, is actually mostly empty space at the atomic level. This fact challenges our understanding of the physical world because everything we consider solid and real is, in a way, an illusion. Quantum physics shows that atoms, which make up matter, aren't consistently solid and behave more like probabilistic waves. This revelation suggests that our understanding of reality is much deeper than it seems, and calls into question how we perceive the world around us. This discovery can literally make you reconsider many aspects of life and how the universe operates. Story 15. That a large percentage of people don't actually have an internal voice. Some research suggests it's between 30%–50%. A lot of people don't realize they don't have it because they still have an inner voice. But it's just imagery, no actual voice. For instance, one subject did all the same tests as people with an inner voice. It wasn't until the researcher gathered more info that they found out this man's undervoice was just colored shaped. The man thought this was normal as his brain deciphered these shapes the way our brain does with the actual inner voice we have. So basically, there's millions of people who are asked, "Do you have an internal monologue?" And they all answer yes, even though it's non-auditory. What's something that's hated on way more than it should be? Story 1. Sitting idle. I hate it when it's labeled as wasting time. You need some time for your brain to slow off and just exist. It's not a crime, don't get me wrong. I'm OCD about keeping a tidy home. I can't stand anything out of place and I love to organize. Autism. But I also love to just chill. I literally clean daily, which takes an hour at most because I'm on top of it, so I can be lazy. And I don't mean white gloves. I do that on occasion, but mostly it's just swept and mopped, surfaces whipped clean and organized. I have a pile of clean, unhung curtains sitting on a rocking chair that's been there for 3 days now. I'll get to it eventually, there is no rush. Also, I do not impose my OCD on others. My son is also autistic and his room is spotless. My daughter is ADHD and her room looks like a natural disaster. Story 2. Other people's interests. People love to just hate things like they're a movie hero with a vengeance. My boy, it literally doesn't affect you, chill. Hobbies in particular. Any post where someone has spent countless hours and considerable sums of money to produce something that's nothing short of an amazing display of skill and patience gets the typical comment of, "But why? What a waste of time." It's almost always from people with no hobbies, interests, or skills to speak of that will never understand that the why is in the act of doing and the fulfillment received when you view the fruits of that effort. Story 3. The word moist. I think everyone hates it because the internet said to 10 years ago. Edit. If you're going to comment on some variation of, "I've hated the word for longer than 10 years, or only women hate that word BC women bad," please spare us, it's already been said dozens of times. Moist being an unpleasant word was part of a running gag in the movie Throw Mama from the Train. Billy Crystal's character was trying to write the opening of his novel. He went through many iterations of "the night was," including hot and wet and moist. Moist got the most picked out response ... F. Rom himself. ... Finally, near the end of the movie, Mama said, "Sultry. The word is sultry." This was in 1987, long before the other suggestions provided. Story 4. Sleeping in. People act like you're a useless member of society if you sleep past 10. I used to have a friend whose mom would force me to go to church with her, but also wake her up every day around 6–7 a.m. to do chores. She was my best and only friend, but I rarely went to her house anymore after that. And she wasn't allowed out to other people's houses. We were in high school too, like 19, and she was treated like a little girl. Infuriating to have her mom wake us up. I felt bad because I would sleep in while she was being bossed around out there. Story 5. People who choose not to drink who aren't recovering alcoholics or pregnant. People who do drink but have decided they don't feel like drinking that night. Their reasoning being they simply don't want to. I went out with friends a few weeks ago for dinner and drinks. I didn't feel like drinking, so I volunteered to drive us all so that we wouldn't have to worry about getting Ubers or anything. At the restaurant, I just ordered a virgin margarita or something, while everyone else got cocktails. The waiter kept on being like, "Oh, come on, everyone else has drinks, join them." And he wouldn't stop until I literally said, "I'm D&D, don't give me any alcohol." For all he knew, I could have had a health issue that made it so I couldn't drink. It could have been for religious reasons. But I shouldn't have had to explain myself when I said I'm not drinking tonight. Even when I gave the initial reasoning of, I don't feel like drinking tonight. Story 6. Vegetables. I think many who don't like vegetables grew up with parents who couldn't really cook, and ended up steaming everything. Sure, sometimes steamed vegetables can be nice, but eat that every day for your entire upbringing, and you're likely going to end up hating vegetables. I had a guest who couldn't stand broccoli. When I served dinner, they noticed that my broccoli didn't look like the broccoli they were used to. I asked them to please try, and they very reluctantly had a small piece. Not as bad as I remember them. Another piece. This is actually pretty okay. Another piece. Crap, this is actually good. I had simply cut the broccoli into nice bouquets. I don't remember the correct term. Instead of just cutting the broccoli all willy-nilly, they're separated into nice flowers, so to speak. Sprinkled some nice evu over them, roasted them, and then some freshly cracked black pepper and sea salt. Story 7. Skunks. They're actually pretty cute and fun to watch if you don't harass them. I got the rare opportunity to observe a skunk super up close once. It was at Kings Island, and I was in line with my cousin for that horrible ball that launches you into the air, and you're lucky if you don't pass out, and you give them money to do this to you. The skunk just kind of wandered out of the bushes, and I gasped and poked my cousin and whispered, "Look! Do it slowly, but look." And he gasped, and the whole line had this understanding that we all stay still and quiet so as not to disturb him, and we all got to just watch him do his little skunk things. He was so close, if I'd reached out and taken a step, I could have touched him. So cool. Story 8. Spiders. They eat things you don't want in your house. Try and leave them alone. Rich couple from the city bought a farm in my home county so they could have horses. Wife walked into the barn the first time, saw the spider webs and freaked out. So all the animals and feed were cleared out of the barn, it was bug-bombed from orbit, and then the walls were washed down. Oh, and the barn swallows had to go too, since they pooped everywhere. So they destroyed their nests. Cue them being subject to what seemed like a biblical plague of biting flies. In the end, they ended up going to a neighbor's barn and importing a bunch of spider egg cases. They also built nesting platforms for the barn swallows. Once the spider and barn swallow populations re-established themselves, the fly problem became just a nuisance. Story 9. Guy Fieri. He actually does quite a bit of charity work. He doesn't pretend to be fancier than he is, he highlights local spots, and he does a ton of charity. Just an average dude who loves food, living his best life. I had no idea people hated this man. He's been to some spots in my neighborhood for diners, drive-ins, and dives, and I always point out his little sign he leaves at each spot to whoever I'm with. His show is one of my favorite things to watch when traveling, because I don't pay for cable at home. People who hate Guy Fieri are just jealous of his flavorful travels. Story 10. Fast food workers. Most of y'all have no idea how hard we actually work, or how horribly y'all treat us for no reason whatsoever. I sat in the drive-thru at McDonald's for 50 minutes a few weeks back. It got jammed up and there was no way to get out of line once you were in line. I got to the window, and a little old lady just started profusely apologizing, telling me how only her and one other lady had shown up to work. I can't even imagine the vitriol they probably had to deal with that day. And all for minimum wage when they should be retired. It's an ugly system. The lady at the next window serving the food looked so frazzled. Story 11. Things that aren't made for you. In my circles, I see it most with video games. People will get so angry over a game not being what they like or want, but like. So what? Not everything on the market is made for you. Find the things that are and let other people enjoy what isn't. It's incredibly weird how fired up people get about something that they don't like that has no effect whatsoever on their lives. I have 2 family members who argue about food all of the time, and I know it's partly to joke around, but I have told them it really annoys me to listen to them arguing about whether or not onions are better sautéed or raw, or whether or not brownies should have nuts. Eat what you like and shut up. Story 12. Any hobby, movie, or book series that is particularly popular amongst women and girls. People just want to look at 2 attractive people smoldering over each other and be super dramatic about it. Being willing to die for each other. The readers know it's BS and would not be a healthy real-world relationship. You know what also wouldn't be healthy real-world relations? Jim and Pam, Ross and Rachel, Nick and Jess, Buffy and literally everyone she hooked up with. Janine and Gregory might be okay. Time will tell. Guys will defend being adult fans of pro wrestling and Ready Player One, saying that it's just a bit of mindless fun, but will eviscerate girls for wasting their own time on their questionable fandoms. Story 13. Gen Z. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just being young and immature because they are young. They're not doomed, again, they're being young and participating in fads just like you did. The stuff you did when you were their age was just as dumb, just as cringeworthy, and made the older generations lose faith in. Then what happened? You grew up and matured. The stuff that's catered towards them isn't dumbed down or soulless or basic or mind-numbing. It's just catered towards a young demographic, which you are not. You aren't the target audience, that's why you don't get it. You're not meant to, as it's not for you. Millennials got the same hate, as did General X and Boomers and so on. And they all grew up. Eventually Gen Z will. And then everyone will hate on Gen Alpha for killing whatever industries and being entitled, and not knowing what real work is, and whatever buzzwords people always use to hate on the latest generation of youths. Also, while I'm at it, people glued to their phones, there's this weird assumption that if I or any other person under 40 is on their phone, they're just rotting their brain or dicking around or are on social media. First of all, everyone looks at their phones, not just General Z and millennials. Second of all, a phone these days is everything in one device. It's a calendar, it gives you the time, it gives you news. It allows you to send important emails, read books, look at timetables, write notes. Someone glued to their phone could be doing any of that kind of stuff. If you didn't give people in the past crap for constantly reading books, reading a newspaper, writing their schedule for the day, looking at their watch and so on, why are you giving people, particularly young people, now for it? Because the platform they do that stuff has changed. Everyone still does that stuff. The only thing that's changed is the platform. It's all now on a phone. Think about that the next time you're on a bus or subway and see everyone glued to their phones. Story 14. Nickelback. It comes from back in the olden times when we still got music from the radio. Nickelback isn't terrible, but it is very straightforward bar rock, and for whatever reason they got played on a lot of stations where they didn't really fit, like hardcore and alternative stations. They ended up getting played for tons of people who weren't into their type of rock in the first place, which not only annoyed a ton of people, but also made Nickelback stand out in their minds. I am sure there were a lot of other bands that would have been hated if they got lots of airtime on stations where they didn't fit, but that rarely happened. It is hard to think of many other bands that were pushed harder into places they didn't really fit. TLDR, back in the radio days, Nickelback got pushed in front of tons of audiences they shouldn't have, unlike many other acts. Story 15. Tofu. It only sucks when people try to use it to replace everything. Mapo tofu is delicious, as is agedashi tofu. Edit. I forgot sundubu. Jjigae is a top 5 soup for me. I love tofu as a replacement for chicken. I love chicken, but a lot of times I get a lot of creepy chicken bits, gristle, etc., and it completely ruins the dish for me. If I get Chinese food, I'll get General Tofu or Kung Pao tofu. People are always ew tofu until they try and realize it tastes exactly like if it were chicken, but no nasty chicken bits. Never need to worry about a dish being ruined by tendons or whatever. Finding ways to prepare tofu in ways that cater to your preferred tastes is so easy. I have no idea why people are so opposed to it. Story 16. Being a stay-at-home mom. Many moons ago, my wife's roommate lost her job. My wife had a good job at the time and could afford the apartment on her own. Her roommate stepped up, took over the grocery shopping, did meal planning, cooked in bulk, did what little housework they generated, etc. One night, as a joke, she met my wife at the door with her slippers and a cocktail. The roommate was feeling guilty that she wasn't able to contribute financially. My wife shut that down quickly. I love having you here. Just by doing the shopping and actually cooking, you're saving me money, and we're eating healthier. We can do canning and freezing this fall. Please don't move back in with your parents. Now add childcare expenses into the equation, and the idea of a samsad makes sense. Add a vegetable garden and some canning supplies, maybe a few food animals, and it makes even more sense. For your information, the roommate, as one link in a decades-long chain of poor life choices, did move back in with her awful parents. Story 17. Androids. People with iPhones think they have some diamond, when most of the time they have a phone Android has already had for years. And before I get the pixelated camera comment, please do your research. If iPhone would use a more updated picture sending service from iPhone to Android instead of a system that hasn't been used in over 15 years by anyone but iPhone, my photo would be the same if not nicer than yours. Story 18. I still don't really get why being considered woke is bad, or why something being woke is bad. I don't really get how when a black person appears in a TV show, now it's considered woke, but in the 2000s it wasn't? For example, how is current-day Power Rangers woke but Mighty Morphin Power Rangers not when it had the same kind of diverse cast? I genuinely just don't get it. It's like those people on YouTube ranting about X-Men 97. It's woke. It's Wookiee, yeah? And it was still pretty good. Everyone I know who watched it liked it too. And on top of that, what the crap did you expect from the X-Men? They did no different to any previous X-Men stuff regarding the mutant thing. Only cause now it's 2024, it's woke. In fact, I don't really know what woke even is. I constantly get a different answer every time. Feels like it's such an overused buzzword now that's used as basically, I don't like it. I think I've seen everything get called woke at this point. Seriously, you afraid you're gonna burst into flames if you watch something woke? Story 19. Men who are in touch with their feelings and they express them. Men who are sensitive are constantly put down due to toxic masculinity. Both men and women crap on guys who exteriorize their emotions uninhibitedly in a gentle, kind-hearted manner and deem them unmanly. Describe them as too feminine, plus many other more grotesque words and phrases. And crying is viewed as a sign of weakness. Women have emotions, men do too. It's indisputable that all humans have emotions. High emotional availability is something that should absolutely not be seen as exclusive to any specific gender, age, or race. It's a universal human condition. It's nothing to be ashamed of, and no one should be belittled or bullied for having or displaying completely valid and sincere emotions, nor for possessing the ability to communicate them. Story 20. Pensioners. I'm fed up with defending myself on Reddit for the crime of being old. The venom thrown at pensioners is totally disgusting and would create a lifetime ban if it was directed at any other group. Color. Religion. Please stop generalizing that all boomers are wealthy. Yeah, some are, and I'm as jealous as the next person, with my pathetic pension. I've worked all my life, but did not have the means to have a huge pension pot. I did have a house, but was forced out by an abusive ex-husband. I'm single, but still have to pay full bills, and the rent is almost half my income. This year, it's eating or heating. I'm not moaning, just stating facts, and I'm certainly not alone in this situation. It's hard being poor, but even harder reading the hatred. Every generation gets it though. Xers got it for being apathetic, millennials get it for ruining things. Only boomers see it to be so bad that it would be a hate crime. The entitlement of your generation is through the roof. Just as you claim ours is unwilling to work hard. What's the worst I hate to break it to you moment you had with someone? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. I used to work in a customer care call center for a major telecommunications company. A woman called in one day to inquire about 2 charges on her bill from Lavalife. She kept pressing about the charges, what they were, and I had to explain to her that Lavalife is a dating service and that the charges were legitimate. If she didn't make them, did someone else live in her house who might have? There was only her husband, and I heard her go from, "but he would never," to "I have to go now" as it set in. That was almost 20 years ago now, and I still feel awful about it. Story 2. When I entered uni, my then boyfriend would sometimes join me in the late afternoon lectures. In one of them, we briefly covered the genetics of colorblindness, and the professor had a slide prepared for an example test, and asked the whole class, it was like 200 plus people, if someone couldn't see the number in the circle. Nobody raised their hands, and my then boyfriend said something like, "Hey, good joke, there was no number." Had to break it to him, he was indeed colorblind. At first he thought I was also just playing a joke, so he turned to a bunch of other students we didn't know. Story 3. Having to tell a student who was almost totally blind that she likely couldn't be an ER nurse. She and her dad moved to our district, and at the IEP, her dad starts talking about how he can't wait for Sue to go to nursing school. I frantically scanned my brain, trying to think of how someone who was going to need Braille would be able to do that job. Then Sue piped up to say that her dream was to be an ER nurse. Her prior district told her she could do anything, including this. She had a degenerative disease that would eventually make her blind. I talked to my friends who are nurses. I talked to our career lady at the school. I researched. But there just wasn't any way someone who couldn't see could be an ER nurse. I reconvened the IEP and had to explain this. I know both were in denial, but I was not happy that the prior district pumped up this idea. I mean, sure, there are lots she could still do, but that just wasn't one of them. Then another student came from the same district with the idea she could be a CSI investigator. She was also nearly blind. Story 4. Claimed to have talked a bunch on the phone, and we didn't really believe him. Eventually, she asked for money for a ticket, and we were all like, there it is. And he finally believed us. He decided to put it to a test, to prove it once and for all, and told her that he'd bought her a ticket for the flight, assuming she'd make up an excuse to get out of it. He didn't really buy the ticket, assuming he was just calling out the catfisher. Well, to his surprise, the day of, he got a call from her, at the airport, panicking because they couldn't find the ticket. He managed to play it off as a mistake, and was able to get her on the flight. She really was the big titty goth girl from the photos. They dated for 5 years, and she came out every summer for like 5 years before they grew apart. Story 5. My best friend in high school was overweight and would sweat profusely. We would come in after lunch in Texas, and he would smell awful. I think he would wear his clothes without washing them after sweating. We had English after, and the AC sucked, so teacher put a fan in the window. He would sit in front of the fan and blow his funk over everyone. The class got together and voted that I should be the one to tell him. Well, I had to break it to him that for the last year he has smelled horribly. I felt pretty bad, but he never stunk again. Story 6. My sister-in-law. My niece plays field hockey and I love her. She plays in 2 different leagues, meaning it's 3 hours of field hockey games every Saturday and Sunday. My sil expected me and my husband to drive an hour one way both days to watch niece play and pay rapt attention the whole time. Did I mention the games are at 7 a.m.? We did this about once a month on either Saturday or Sunday, and I guess this wasn't enough for her. We had to tell her that we loved niece, but we weren't going to be as involved as she was in the league. Story 7. I had an employee who was a strict vegetarian for religious reasons. One day, we were discussing the employee salad bar, and he mentioned how much he loved the Caesar dressing packets they offered. I was surprised and stupidly blurted out, "Oh, I didn't realize you ate fish." He responded that he was vegetarian and gave me a quizzical look. I had to explain that the salad dressing contained both fish and Parmesan cheese, which is almost always cultured with animal rennet. He didn't believe me, and, the next day, insisted on reading the ingredients on one of the packets to me to prove to me that I was wrong. Then he got to the anchovies and got quiet. I still feel awful that he had to find out that way. Neither of us handled the situation well. Story 8. About a decade ago, I was having dinner with friends, and we were all sharing crazy partying stories. One friend said that a few weeks before that, she witnessed a drunk girl chasing her crush around, frantically trying to kiss him or grope him. The poor guy kept telling her to stop, but she wouldn't have it. Some of the drunk girl's friends even joined in. They tried to undress the guy and would not let him leave. Eventually, the guy managed to escape and ran back to his car. My friend was telling that story as if we were supposed to laugh, but at one point, we gently broke it down to her that she had witnessed attempted rape, and the fact that the victim was a man was not an excuse. My friend's face changed as the horror of what she had seen dawned on her. Story 9. I was at a tech entrepreneurial meetup back in 2012. I spoke with one guy who was enthusiastically describing his billion-dollar idea, an app that people at the gym could use to track their workouts and do challenges. He said there was even a social media potential because people could share their progress. "You mean like Strava?" I asked, thinking he had perhaps identified a niche market not covered by Strava and Demondo and others. I got a confused, "What?" in response. He'd never heard of it. The look on his face when I showed him the app and he saw that his idea had been thoroughly realized for some time was tragic. How he had gotten as far with his idea as he had without finding any existing apps is a mystery to me. Story 10. I was a 15-year-old freshman and she was 17-year-old senior. When we started dating, she said she wanted to wait 2 months before having sex. I was a virgin and wasn't even really worried about it, so I agreed. Then a month later things got hot and heavy and she insisted that we do it. I asked, "Are you sure? You said you wanted to wait." but she insisted on banging it out anyways. Afterwards, she said that it was a test to see if I would actually wait like I said I would, and that I failed just like every other guy before me did. Then she dumped me. Story 11. There was a rule at my job where only one of these two supervisors could be off at a time. One of them loved to take a full week off work during holidays to get more bang for his PTO buck. One year, he had Thanksgiving week off, but the other supervisor had family come to town that week on late notice. The other supervisor asked him to cancel just one of his days so she could spend the day with family. He declined, even after she basically begged him, and even said he didn't have anything to do that day. She then proceeded to take PTO days every Wednesday of a holiday week for the next calendar year, effectively blocking him from taking his cheap weeks off. He told me that he thought it was funny because he knew she didn't have enough time to take all those vacation days off, and she'd eventually have to cancel some of them. I got to tell him, I hate to break it to you, but she only took 2 hours off each of those days. See, the rule didn't differentiate between a partial or whole day, so she only had to burn 24 or so hours to block him. He looked devastated. It was kind of petty on both of their parts, but I give her credit for being creative in her retribution, and don't blame her a bit for what she did. Story 12. I had a guy working for me that was extremely nice, easy to get along with, and wildly inept. Not even like low effort, but just not capable of learning seemingly basic tasks. We tried everything. Coaching, giving him legitimate checklist instructions, having a team lead sit with him for a couple weeks to walk him through basics, everything. Everyone said the same thing. He just couldn't do the job. Everything he did had to be double-checked by somebody else, which meant that we might as well have somebody else do it. But everyone liked the guy. They thought he was easygoing and cool to be around, everything. But still, he just straight up couldn't do that job. So I had to find another place for him in the company that would better match his skills. The option would be for him to either take the lower job with lower pay, or he would be fired, with severance. I was not looking forward to the conversation. I called him in for a one-to-one to break it to him, and the first thing he started with was, "Hey boss. Before we start, I just want to tell you that I really feel like I've been doing a great job here, and I would like to talk about a raise." Yeah, that conversation was not a fun one. Story 13. A friend of mine unironically thought that he was the first person ever to experience existentialism. He literally said that no one ever talks about how small we are in the grand scope of the universe, and kept saying that no one else ever wants to talk about the meaning of life. I felt too bad to explain to him that the concept of how small we are in relation to our world has literally been one of the backbones of philosophy for centuries. Story 14. My friend has been constantly complaining about her husband. I visited them for a couple of weeks, and I had to break to her that she is the problem, like massively so. I genuinely felt sorry for her husband by the time I left. The man gets both verbally and emotionally abused constantly. I told him he should report her to the police if she ever hit him again, because honestly, the situation is completely out of control. Even more out of control than she is. She needs a couple nights in jail to rethink her choices, to be honest. Story 15. Daughter of my mom's closest friend. When she floated the idea of owning a dog, I told her that since she has dog allergy, she should not get any dogs. She proceeded to ignore the advice and get 3 dogs just because they are cute. One of them loved to climb into her bed every night. After 3 years of complaining about headache, fatigue, constant runny nose, and skin problems, I finally have a "I hate to break it to you" moment with her, and she finally believed me and decided to give the dogs to her maid. It was a longer story than that. She first tested it by banishing that dog from her bedroom, then eventually restricting them to just the ground floor, and her symptoms keep improving after each attempt. Her symptoms vanished within 3 months. What's a crazy body life hack everyone should know? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. If you think it would be at all challenging, a simple rule would be anyone over age 50, get fully on the floor and back up again every single day. You really don't want to fall and then realize that you can't get yourself back up into your phone for help. Practicing so that it isn't terribly difficult ensures that you will still be able to do it even if you have a mild injury from the fall. Most people who are falling risks are that way because they are not strong in their core. Your excellent suggestion will help people keep their core strong. Story 2. If you have lower back pain or sciatica, try gluteus medius burnouts. Use a chair or table to steady yourself, and raise one leg straight out to the side as high as you can, and hold that until it feels like your hip is on fire and trying to cramp. Repeat on the other side. It sounds crazy, but it can eliminate lower back pain instantly. My experience treating low back pain is that most people with back pain are weak or bad at using their glutes, and that is a pretty strong driver of pain. Any sort of glute work, max and MedMin, helps probably 60 to 70% of my low back people. Hip internal rotation is also a nearly universal deficit in people I see. Lack of IR range and strength can be surprisingly limiting in both power output and endurance before pain comes on. Story 3. Vagus nerve trick for calming yourself down. If you're feeling super anxious or stressed, try splashing your face with cold water or holding an ice pack on your forehead and under your eyes for a few seconds. It activates your vagus nerve, which helps slow your heart rate and calm you down almost instantly. Thank me later. Also, the Valsalva maneuver. You close your mouth and pinch your nose, then try to exhale. It doesn't just make your ears pop, it also dramatically lowers your blood pressure and heart rate. I use it when I'm having episodes of tachycardia, and my heart rate will drop from to in about seconds. Story 4. Minutes of daily exercise is infinitely better than minutes and will make a big difference. Some of the best advice I've ever heard is, if it's worth doing poorly. Maybe you don't have it in you to floss your teeth after a long, stressful day. Brushing is still better than nothing. I despise washing silverware, but I can get a few plates into the dishwasher. Not gonna hit 10,000 steps today? Take a 5-minute walk. I applied this to the elliptical and do basically min a day now. Some weeks I may do days only, but the idea is the same. I show up and do at least 10, it's almost always 20% now, and sometimes it's even 30%. It's done wonders. My heart rate went from like 80% resting to like 60 seconds. It all started with the, I'm gonna force myself to do 2 minutes level of thinking. Story 5. If you have a stuffy nose due to a cold or allergy, try doing push-ups, jumping jacks, or any form of intense sudden activity. It's a near instant relief. I always get the exact mechanism wrong, but since stuffy noses happen due to swelling in the tissue of the nose, sudden activity promotes blood flow and drainage of mucus. It's temporary, of course, but worth a try. Another hack for nasal congestion: take a deep breath and exhale until there's nothing left in your lungs and hold till you can't anymore. Instant relief once you breathe again, as your nasal passages dilate, trying to get as much air in as possible. Story 6. Starting strength. Everybody with no history of lifting should do some kind of bench or squat routine, adding progressively more weight over time. Beginners will quickly add a huge amount of strength and muscle. Eventually progress slows and people can decide how, if to continue. But no reason not to take advantage of beginner gains. You don't actually add much muscle or strength. What is happening is that your brain is new to those movements against resistance. So as you perform them again and again, your brain figures out a more effective way to perform the movement via utilizing your nervous system and muscles more effectively. The reason progress eventually slows down is because your brain utilizing your body correctly can only take you so far, and that's when it slows, because building muscles takes much longer than the aforementioned process. Still healthy to do resistance training, but this is why this phenomenon happens. It's only a misconception that you're gaining strength during this time. Your friendly neighborhood. Story 7. People are gaining strength during this time. Anytime you progressively overload your muscles are being stressed, which prompts adaptation, muscle growth. What this poster is saying is that if you've never lifted before and start doing a certain lift, suppose after a month you can lift more weight than before. Of that 30%, about half might be actual strength, muscle gains, and the other half is your central nervous system learning to fire more effectively and muscle memory gains. Those numbers are totally made up, but that's the general idea. Over time, your nervous system gains dramatically decrease, and future gains are almost entirely strength muscle. This is why lifting gains slow down in advanced lifters. Story 8. To quickly relieve a cramping calf usually happens while sleeping. Stand on your feet. Feels counterintuitive, but standing up forces your leg muscles to stretch and stop the cramping. When this happens to me, I straighten my leg, push my heel out, toes up. It feels like the last thing you want to try doing, but it provides instant relief. I learned this trick when I was younger. I used to get frequent cramps because I was a dumb fat kid that ate junk all the time and didn't consume enough potassium. As soon as I'd feel the cramp, I'd jump out of bed and just put as much pressure on the calf as I could. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that anymore. Story 9. One effective body hack for managing stress is the 5 to 5 minus 5 method. When you feel overwhelmed, take a moment to ground yourself by identifying 5 things you can see, 5 things you can feel, and 5 sounds you can hear. This quick exercise helps redirect your focus to the present moment, making it easier to calm your mind and reduce anxiety. It's simple and can be done anywhere. This reminds me of the box breathing technique my wife uses for when her asthma is bad. I guess military personnel are trained to use it to help deal with torture. It's 4x4 breathing, like the sides of a square box, I guess? You breathe in for a count of 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, wait 4 seconds, then repeat. Story 10. For weight loss. Run the abs first. Crunches, planking, whatever you're comfy with, just keep your core tight. Do throughout the day in small sets anytime you have a moment. You immediately increase your metabolism, even if slightly, and feel more full on less food. When you eat, and after, drink lots of water. Don't chug, just keep sipping through the hours after meals till you have to pee. When you have to pee, you know you have successfully flooded your tract, and this will help break down food and increase speed of digestion. Plus, hydration helps with weight loss generally. Keep your core tight through the day and drink till you need to pee after each meal. You will lose weight on this alone. When you get down to your target weight, or heck, whenever comfortable, add some additional exercise to zones you want to tone up. Story 11. Drastically reduce or eliminate alcohol intake. Your body and mind will thank you. Balanced hormones, stronger immune system, better sleep, weight loss, clearer skin. Prior to this year, I would drink on average nights per week, drinks each of those nights. There weren't any issues with dependence or abuse, but I grew to hate my relationship with alcohol. I'm happy to report that my physical and mental health have greatly improved in just a few months, since I cut back to 1 to 2 drinks per month, if that. Story 12. The mammalian diving reflex can stop an anxiety or panic attack instantly. Hold your breath and splash water on your face or dunk your head, and your body goes into underwater mode. Your body gets ready to conserve oxygen by slowing down lots of processes, switching off, not the technical term, some organs and parts of your brain. Panic requires too much oxygen. Panicking underwater will lead to drowning, so your body just cancels out of it. This is also why throwing a drink in an angry person's face stops them on their tracks. Story 13. A lot of people don't want to hear this, but simply exercising more. Like, go lift weights hard. Don't do some half-assed litter cardio aerobic thing for like 20 minutes with a bunch of breaks. I'm talking like spend 45 minutes to an hour lifting heavy. Lift to failure a couple sets per week. It's like magic. I stopped to rest for a few weeks after months of serious working out and cutting a ton of body fat. Upped my calories, just hung out for those weeks before cycling into calorie surplus for a weight gain cycle through winter. I started back at the gym last week, but in the few weeks during which I was not lifting, days per week, I felt awful. I hadn't realized how much of a difference it was making to every aspect of how I felt. When I wasn't lifting, my mood stability decreased. I felt more anxious and more easily stressed out by minor crap daily. My energy levels, both physically and mentally, were in the gutter the whole time. I'd regularly be struggling to stay awake and stay focused at my desk job. I struggled to get to sleep at night and struggled to sleep straight through the night. It seemed like I became more generally irritable. Story 14. Snoring is deadly. I don't give a crap if you don't want to sleep with that mask on, or if you just lose some weight, you'll stop snoring. I'm shouting this next part. Ask your doctor and/or get treated for sleep apnea, people. Your risk of sudden cardiac death increases some 500% with sleep apnea. You are 100% a crap if you let other people suffer because of your excuses. You think noise is the worst of it? Wait till they can't wake you in the morning, or worse, when they can't, and they call, and the medics do wake you up. If you aren't a veggie, enjoy a minimum of $100,000 in vegetable bills. If you dare offer any nonsense argument, and they are all nonsense, against the simple process of asking your doctor, is this a concern? Then pack your crap and leave your family now. You're too selfish to be bothered with. You're right up there with people who smoke for 40 years and then say, "Can I have a lung transplant?" No, just ask. That's it. Ask. Don't be a crap. If you want to be crap, fine. I don't expect you to have the courtesy to die alone, but this is your choice as well. Story 15. Brain is working during sleep. When you have some non-mundane task of some complexity where you are unsure about the best solution. First A, do only some introduction into the problem. Think about the plan, examine the place, play with the source material for a while. Go to sleep. Second day, be amazed that you have clearer vision of the solution. Sleep in a cold room. Eating with sticks is fun, also makes you eat more slowly. You can exercise in the bathtub, sitting, legs together as far, lying, body up and down. Experiment with different water levels. Also fun in a bath is an open inlet, just a tiny bit with hot water is some calming noise. Water rises slowly for an hour and keeps you hot. Sauna is good. Or just hot tub, cold shower. What is your best or worst don't meet your hero's story? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. My husband was a huge Weird Al fan. In 2017, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Ever the optimist, he bought VIP tickets for a Weird Al concert with a meet and greet option for spring of 2018. Unfortunately, he passed away before the concert. The kids and I still went. My brother took my husband's ticket and joined us, and I brought a photo of my husband. When we went to the meet and greet, Al took a photo with my family while we held my husband's portrait. He didn't make a big thing about it or say anything, he just smiled, shook his head yes knowingly when I pulled the picture out and took the photo with us. I'll be forever grateful to him for letting us have that family photo with my kids without bringing us all down by asking about it. He was exactly how we needed him to be. Story 2. I worked as a cashier in a State Line, Nevada casino in the early 80s. Part of our training included a warning that Bruce Dern often gambled in the early morning, and he did not like to be recognized. I've been a huge Bruce Dern fan since Silent Running, and it was enough for me to spot him from across the room. One day, I'm training a new hire, and Mr. Dern came to our window. I had forgotten to warn my trainee about him. After the trainee cashed out his chips, he says, "Has anyone ever told you that you look just like Bruce Dern?" Mr. Dern grins and says, "I get that a lot," and walks away. Made my day. Story 3. I met Tim Curry a few years ago, and it was a different kind of bad. He was so frail it broke my heart. I have a good friend who met him at a con about 6 years ago, and had a similar experience. She's into nail art, and had her nails done as an homage to some of his characters. And when she showed him, she said it took a while to register, but when it did, he said, "Hey, I'm on your nails." She cries now when she retells the story, and said she asked permission to hug him and said, "Of course you are." She said it gave her closure but also was so sad to see him in such a frail state. Story 4. I met Will Wheaton at a big skiffy con a few years ago. It was like halfway through the third day, and he'd been signing stuff for hours. I got to the front of the line, and he jumped out of his chair in excitement and yelled, "Are those Batleth earrings? So cool." He then proceeded to sign my dorky old TNG comic, with Wesley Crusher on the cover of course, and we put an earring on the cover so he could take a photo of Wes with it. We talked about open source software and EFF. Whole interaction took 3 to 4 minutes, but he was just totally there for it, despite having 100 other people he'd have to interact with. He later included the photo in his blog. Story 5. Went to see Penn and Teller in Vegas, and one of their magic tricks during the show involved the audience. The trick worked for everyone in my family, but not for me. Now they're well known for meeting people after their show, so we stayed, got autographs and photos with TDM at. Ben Teller was talking, they couldn't have been nicer. Penn asked me what you'd think of the show, so my stupid mouth just fired back, "Your audience trick didn't work." He then asked my family, "Did it work for you?" They all nodded, and with an enthusiastic yes without missing a beat, he turns to me, "Well, there's the problem, you're an idiot." Getting personally insulted by Penn was the high point of that Vegas trip. Story 6. Met Martin Short in an alley in Louisiana, on his way in to shoot that Jersey Shore spoof he did on some late-night talk show. Nicest guy in the world, told security to back off, and that he had all the time in the world to talk to the people who put him where he was that day. Took pictures, signed stuff, just chatted like a normal human being. A family friend of mine kept calling him Marty, and he never corrected him. Seemed to get a kick out of it, ha ha ha. Bid the most respectful thank you and goodbye when time really did run out, and he was at risk of missing his call time or whatever. Story 7. At a corporate training session, we had all the best mechanical engineers in one place, and I know one dude from reputation. One of those guys that could take a downed helicopter and get it flying again with very little time and spare parts. His record was amazing. He raked in huge sums over this reputation. I found out he'd sign off riskier projects under other people's names, so if it turned out to not be doable, his reputation would remain intact, and most of those miracle patchworks that I mentioned would be at the cost of tearing down other functional equipment. So he'd take a vehicle with torn to crap, boast about how he'd put it back together, then proceed to take parts from another of the same kind, but with minor damages and still working, break it down, and use that to repair his pet project, effectively breaking 3 to 4 vehicles to repair one, and make himself look good. Story 8. I met Robin Williams while working on a comedy show, and he couldn't have been more kind and friendly, with me gushing about how I wore out his first comedy album on vinyl and had to buy another one. He said your parents must have been pretty cool. Most of them would, pantomimes breaking a record over his knee after the first day of the shoot. All us camera operators had to be told to back off Robin because we all wanted to be around him, and we had too much footage of him already. He spent a lot of time talking to fellow legend Mort Saul. Story 9. I've loved Alan Cumming since the very start of his career. I saw his first TV appearance with Forbes Masson. Fast forward almost 30 years, I've moved to the USA and met my now husband, who casually mentioned that he knows another Scottish guy, yep, you guessed it, Alan Cumming. We met up with Alan when he came to town to perform, and despite him just coming off stage and exhausted, he was incredibly friendly and delighted to meet me and the kids. We get together a New York time he's in the area and have met up with him in NY. He's one of the nicest people I've ever met, and he adores our kids. He has sent them wee videos on their birthday a few times too. Just a wonderful guy. Story 10. Not mine, but a friend's, Jason Alexander, George from Seinfeld, came to give a guest lecture on acting at the university my friend attended. My friend was on his way to class when he ran into Jason Alexander, who had just finished up his lecture. Instead of saying, "You're George from Seinfeld," my friend said, "Holy crap, you're Jason Alexander." Jason Alexander heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Nobody remembers my name. It's always George this, Festivus that. Know what, kid? Want to get lunch together?" And my friend says, "Oh, sorry, I'm late for class," and takes off for biology. He gets to class, sits down, and suddenly realizes he just turned down lunch with Jason Alexander. Don't meet your heroes, because sometimes you're really dumb, and they'll see it. Story 11. Went to see James Blake in Philly. On the way to the show, we spotted him at a small coffee shop. Stopped in to say we were going to see him, and he was so happy, took a pic with us. At the time, me and my buddies and I were running a small clothing company, high school biz, nothing big. We told James and his producer we had free shirts in our car. The car was parked in a dingy Philly alleyway. James and his producer freaking trusted us, came to the car, and we gave them shirts. Show starts. James walks out wearing our shirt and proceeds to shout out the 2 lovely lads who gave us these shirts and shout out the name of our company. I never screamed so loud, it was amazing. Edit. Here is footage from the show, and you can kinda see the shirt. It says AMV, which stands for Anonymous Mad Villainy, which was the company name because we thought we were so cool. Story 12. When I was a kid, I was super into Broadway and musical theater. My dream was to be in Broadway. So for my 9th birthday, my mom got us tickets to see Wicked on Broadway in New York with most of the original cast. This was a huge trip for us, as we lived on the West Coast. My mom had mentioned to someone working at the show that it was her daughter's birthday, and that Idina Menzel was my hero. This was before Frozen, and before she was as big of a name as she is now. Somehow, this person brought us backstage after the show to meet the cast. Everyone backstage was very kind and sweet to me, except Idina Menzel. Kristen Chenoweth was super awesome, and Joey McIntyre was really nice and trying to cheer me up, but Idina wouldn't come out of her dressing room. I got to hear her tell Joey, through her dressing room door, that she didn't care about some kid and to leave her alone. 9-year-old me was crushed, And even though the others were kind and did their best to salvage the situation, I lost interest in musical theater after that. Story 13. Was kinda into ski racing as a kid, and was working with my instructor when he held me back in the lift line in a chair only to catch the next ride. Lo and behold, it was Picabo Street with us on the chair. My little preteen soul was in awe. She was a badass. Pulled a full 6-inch sub out of her jacket and started chowing down and chatting away about eating enough, racing, skiing, life, etc. I can barely remember what she said. I couldn't stop staring. She took 2 runs with us. I could barely pretend to keep up, of course, but she was so nice. I was in awe. Amazing person. Still think back about how she was just so cool. What an incredible experience. Great role model. Story 14. Met fellowship members Viggo Mortensen and Ian McKellen on separate occasions while I was working as a camera operator for an entertainment channel. Viggo was a delight, could tell I was really starstruck, so he asked me for a selfie before we got rolling. When I told him my friends and I used to pretend to be Aragorn at playtime in our youth, he laughed and told me it was incredibly sweet. McKellen saw me accidentally smash a mirror to smithereens while I was setting up my shot, and couldn't have been kinder to delay him by cleaning up on what must have been a very busy day for him. Story 15. Met Tobey Maguire at a fan meet and greet back in 2013. I think it was a promotion for the Great Gatsby movie. Looking back, I genuinely felt bad for him because everyone kept asking him about Spider-Man and not the Great Gatsby. He called off the event before I got his autograph because some crap wanted him to talk about why Sony canned him for Andrew Garfield. As an adult looking back now, I see why actors get pissed with crap like that.
I think with certain actors who are most commonly associated with one role in particular, it sucks knowing that no matter what future roles you take, someone in the theater would point at you and say, "Hey, isn't that Spider-Man?" I have always sympathized with Tobey because of that reason.
In your opinion, what is the greatest threat to global peace right now? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. The wrong people in positions of power. Democracy is, as a wise man once said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. But for democracy to work, you need a well-informed and educated populace, one that's at least moderately resistant to demagoguery and deceit. You can agree to disagree on politics only when the people involved are offering plausible, coherent, and cohesive solutions in the first place, and there's different pros and cons to each. So I contend the very major problem is that if education gets run down, your democracy will fail at its purpose. And I think I see this happening in various places. That in turn leads to people desiring a more functional democracy, where the wrong sort are excluded from it. But that's a very dangerous place to go no matter how well-meaning you are. Even if you're absolutely correct that in the short term, it'll avert something terrible. Story 2. Social media. What scares the shit out of me is that the youth these days get their news from TikTok or 10th. Sure, well-established news sites can be biased and manipulated. But it's not ever going to be as bad as the misinformation disguised as news on TikTok, and 10th. Social media has become a powerful tool for electoral manipulation, spreading mass misinformation, and destabilizing democracies worldwide. Its algorithms amplify false narratives, polarize societies, and provide a platform for bad actors to influence public opinion. As we've seen in recent years, the unchecked spread of misinformation can undermine trust in democratic institutions and erode the foundations of informed decision-making. Is it time to rethink how social media is regulated, or are we already too far down the rabbit hole? Story 3. I read a story from a teacher about how a student tried to correct her on a topic because they heard it from ChatGPT. Not only was it wrong, it was a well-written, cited piece of misinformation. The kid believed it was real, and it scared the teacher. Edit. The kid believed it was a search engine. Social media has changed the social landscape and social values completely. Even more so for the younger of us, where kids are now bullied for their lack of social media presence or ability in video games. But public access to an AI that generates well-written, incorrect arguments for anything could spell the death knell for public teaching. Its only counter would be well-informed, educated parents raising their kid with little access to social media, or to be critical enough to not believe everything they read on the internet, a task already failed by so many. who then blame education and the school. Story 4. Rigged elections is something I'm really afraid of. You could take the cynical approach to it. The president doesn't matter anyway. The president not winning the popular vote but getting elected anyway has happened 6 times in US history. Starting back in 1824, your vote doesn't matter if it would actually be disruptive. You should be. The GOP spent years installing people specifically to challenge this election. There's no outcome that they'll accept. Trump won the Electoral College in 2016, and they still farted about it for his entire term. Story 5. Rupert Murdoch has ruined not one but 3 Western democracies and fundamentally changed America. He really is a failure, isn't he? Sure, he's been enormously successful financially and influentially, but with the brains and work ethic, he clearly had to make himself so successful. It's a tragedy he didn't use it for the betterment of the human race, instead of just becoming one of the world's biggest parasites. Imagine what the world could be like if his business empire transformed into one of investigative journalism rather than celebrity gossip and often made-up political scandals. Story 6. The fact that we have universal censorship of empirical facts being drowned in unmitigated nonsense, and a cultural movement financial support by billionaires to keep this going for political power. Almost every major modern dissent movement active in a free speech Western democracy is rooted in pure fantasy, and we're close to handing over the keys to them. Alternative view, the world has always been like that, but we are at the beginning of the information age in which we are starting to learn just how corrupt things are, and things are starting to change slowly with younger generations starting to be of age to run for government. Story 7. The lack of morality and the increase of individualism and righteousness. Morality is just a word and people have different definitions of it. I'm using it as an agreed set of behaviors between people. I don't mean it in a religious connotation at all. I feel like people are very concerned with themselves, identity, and being separate from others. And paradoxically, this can be done in a group. We are one people, we are separate from the other humans, we have a definite culture, we have a heritage, etc. There's not that many world leaders who say we're all one people, living on one planet, who need to take care of each other. Of course, it's always been this way to a greater or lesser extent. That's what politics is. But I feel when the balance shifts more towards separation than inclusion, that's when you get war. Story 8. In general terms, religion. In exact terms, Russia and Ukraine still have the ability to spiral out of control. Especially now that Ukraine is hitting back, the ME looks like it's going to spiral out of control again, and frankly, I can't see Israel winning this time. Maybe because Russia is distracted with Ukraine, Iran won't have the funds to go to war themselves. China is just like the US Europe, waiting to see what happens, and the second the West makes a move or are too distracted, they'll take Taiwan. I also believe they're going to take Russia at pennies on the dollar. Story 9. Climate change. I know that's a topic that is hot for many, but long-term, it can affect resources, especially water as well as agriculture and fishing and such. So you're looking at changes in the fundamental needs for human survival. You can mediate differences in views on race, or nationalism, or even optional material needs like oil. But the needs of actual survival, that's something that can cause a lot of wars. It is one reason that the DoD considers it a major threat. Not because of wokeism, as some might say, because the US military is a super liberal group, but they keep playing out the scenarios. Story 10. Inequality. People look at Russia, and it has a global impact, but in terms of war, it's not going to spread. China isn't going to kick off anytime soon. The Middle East, including Israel, is the most likely of the 3 to spiral just because of Iran. Realistically, though, these conflicts will stay contained, however, as inequality grows and internal unrest grows in Western nations. Sooner or later, the wrong leader is going to wade into a conflict to distract the masses. Story 11. People with low IQ breeding like rabbits. You can handle a few evil people. You can't handle a lot of dumb people trying to trample your civilization. When a significant portion of the population lacks critical thinking skills, the very foundation of democratic processes and informed decision-making is compromised. This vulnerability can lead to the manipulation of public opinion by those with malicious intent, who may exploit emotional appeals and misinformation. As a result, Policies that harm societal welfare may gain traction, while beneficial reforms could be rejected. This cycle can create an environment where ignorance proliferates, ultimately eroding the social fabric and undermining progress. Moreover, the inability to engage in constructive dialogue or to understand complex issues can foster division and conflict within communities. In a society where the majority lacks the ability to discern truth from falsehood, the risk of authoritarianism increases, as those in power can exploit the ignorance of the populace to maintain control. Story 12. Global warming. Countries and climates that will be uninhabitable for parts of the year or the entire year, basically any country between the tropics. And also the countries within the subtropical regions that aren't balanced out by some nearby effect will lose basically their entire workforce and collapse. But that's not even the worst effect globally. It will only cause some local conflicts. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to downplay this. And being forced out of your homes because the richer nations have fucked the climate and the alternative is dying of a heat stroke is absolutely horrible. But this effect of global warming won't cause World War III. The thing that will threaten world peace, whatever that means in a day and age where the temples of Janus would be open 24/7 due to minor conflicts, is that these people will want to move to the remaining areas with livable climates, and those areas are already densely inhabited by people from different cultures and ethnicities. Story 13. Worship. For as long as humans have existed, we've tried really hard to keep the terrible things we say, think, or do private. If a politician or celebrity had any one of their controversial thoughts or actions put out into the world, their careers would be ruined. Nowadays, though, it seems the complete opposite. The bigger an asshole you are, and the more controversial you are, the more a specific subset of society will not only embrace you, but put you on a pedestal. Racist rants, violence. Any of these would have gotten you shunned a few decades ago, but these days, if you do it loud and proud, people will love you for it. You don't even need to lie and say someone is spreading rumors either. While there's always been people who have embraced the worst among us on a more or less contrarian basis, what's going on now is mainstream and hard to understand. There just seems to be this ever-growing group of people who love assholes, and nothing that asshole does will ever make them stop, except maybe if they stopped being an asshole. And this trend cuts across political divides, and it continues to get worse and worse every day. And social media really seems to feed this. Story 14. Social media perpetuated division of people through a great lack of empathy by everyone, combined with a great lack of knowledge and education on how to have constructive, non-dismissive discourse. Reddit, at least the subreddit's eyebrows, in particular, has a penchant for being incredibly demeaning and dismissive towards people, which only serves to create a hostile and toxic environment for discussion. Subreddit moderators do not help with this either. There are very few subreddits with rules in place that actively help facilitate proper discussion. It's as though these subreddits do not care about fostering a healthy community for discussion conversation, which ultimately is what the comment section of Reddit is all about. I remember forums having stricter rules focused more towards facilitating good faith conversation. Subreddits have none of that, presumably with the assumption that the up-downvote system will take care of that. However, fact of the matter is that it doesn't, since it is often the majority acting problematic. So any attempt at going against them is drowned out by the exact problematic comments being upvoted themselves while the attempts are downvoted. Those are the exact moments when moderators should step in, but they never do. They never act in favor of healthy discourse. Story 15. Ignorance. We have politicians as leaders when we should have scientists and scholars instead. In areas of the world where democratic elections are held, they are voted on by a population that is by and large uninterested, uninvolved, and undereducated. We are subject in the USA to debates, which hold little substance, and are barely more than high school cafeteria-style fights of he said, she said, lie accusations rather than serious discussion of policy. We focus as a world on entertainment, e.g. movies, video games, and pop stars, rather than on global issues. The world operates in a way that maximizes our primal instincts and minimizes our ability to appeal to our best selves. It has always been this way, and I think it's tough to imagine a scenario where it actually changes, and the kind of moves that it would require would likely cause a level of chaos the world hasn't ever seen.